Ilara's existence was a whispered apology in a world that celebrated magic with every breath. Her half-elven heart, barren of arcane power, beat a solitary rhythm on the fringes of Eldoria, a realm where lineage and destiny were etched in spells she could never cast. The dark skin from her human mother, juxtaposed with the pointed ears of her elven father, marked her as an anomaly, a living testament to impurity. She was an outcast, haunted by the chilling silence of rejection, a loneliness that refused to heal amidst a society that wished she simply did not exist. If this tale of solitude resonates, tell us where you're watching from, the time you're seeing this, and your name. Then join our community by subscribing, for this story is just beginning. Her life was a relentless battle against prejudice, a solitary existence eked out on the harsh edges of Eldoria. Far from the gleaming spires of the Elven kingdom, whispers followed her like shadows, impure, worthless, each syllable a fresh cut to her already scarred spirit. She moved through the world unseen, unheard, a ghost in a land vibrant with life and magic she could never touch. The very air, thick with arcane energy, felt like a constant mockery, a reminder of her profound lack. Every day was a testament to her resilience, a quiet defiance against a society that had cast her aside. Yet the weight of that solitude was crushing, threatening to consume her entirely. It was a life devoid of comfort, connection, or the simple dignity of belonging, a perpetual exile within her own homeland. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe, because this story is just beginning. Now, let's continue. Beneath the stoic facade she presented to the unforgiving world, Ilara harbored a desperate, unspoken yearning. Her greatest fear wasn't the physical hardship of her solitary life, but the terrifying prospect of perpetual solitude, of never finding a place where her inherent worth wasn't dictated by arcane power. She craved connection, a soul that might see beyond her sin of being magicless, past the dark skin and pointed ears that screamed outsider. This secret desire was a fragile flame she guarded fiercely, a contradiction to the hardened shell she wore. She yearned for acceptance, for a simple touch of kindness, a shared glance that didn't hold judgment. It was a silent rebellion against the rigid tenets of Eldoria, where magic was not merely a gift, but the immutable law dictating status and destiny, a law that condemned her to an existence of eternal longing. Her normal world was a tapestry woven with threads of hardship and quiet desperation. Each dawn brought the familiar chill of the damp hovel she called home, a meager shelter on the fringes of the forbidden Shadowfen, a place as neglected and feared as she was. Her days were a monotonous cycle of foraging for sustenance, mending tattered clothes, and avoiding the rare, disdainful glances of passing elven patrols, who saw her as little more than a persistent pest. The weight of her responsibilities, self-imposed to simply exist without causing trouble, pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. Every interaction, even the most fleeting, was fraught with the potential for humiliation, a reminder of her low status. She observed the distant, gleaming spires of Eldoria, a symbol of a world forever beyond her reach, a vibrant life she could only ever glimpse from the cold, shadowed edges. One ordinary afternoon, as the setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the murky waters of the Shadowfen, a disquieting shift rippled through the air. It wasn't a sound she heard with her ears, but a vibration she felt deep in her bones, a tremor in the very fabric of Eldoria's fading magic that even her magicless senses could discern. The usual oppressive silence of the fen gave way to an unsettling hum, a raw, desperate energy bleeding into the atmosphere. A chilling premonition, sharp and undeniable, seized her. Something was terribly wrong. Something ancient and powerful was in distress. Her gaze instinctively swept towards the dark, whispering reeds at the fen's edge. a place of ill repute, and there, amidst the gloom, a faint, ethereal glow pulsed erratically, a silent, urgent summons, pulling her towards the unknown, towards a destiny she could never have imagined. Her earliest memories were not of a mother's gentle embrace or a father's protective hand, but of cold stares and averted gazes. Born from a forbidden union, Ilara was a living anomaly. Her human mother's dark skin and elven father's pointed ears, a stark contrast to the ethereal beauty of pure-blood elves. The real sin, however, was her utter lack of magic, a void where vibrant arcane energy should have pulsed. From the moment she drew breath, she was marked, not by a blessing but by a curse. Her childhood was a silent exile, a constant reminder that she was an unwanted stain on the purity of Eldoria, a realm where even the air hummed with magic she could never touch. This fundamental rejection, deeply ingrained before she could even comprehend its meaning, became the bedrock of her existence, shaping every interaction, every thought, every whispered hope. The echoes of impure and worthless resonated deeper than any spoken word, becoming the silent soundtrack to her formative years. Her elven father, burdened by societal shame, retreated into the rigid expectations of his kin, leaving a chasm of abandonment in Ilara's young heart. Her human mother, loving yet powerless in a magical world, offered little protection against the relentless tide of prejudice. Ilara grew up observing other children, vibrant with burgeoning magic, their lives a kaleidoscope of spells and shared laughter, while she remained an invisible shadow. The absence of a magical spark wasn't just a lack of power. It was a profound spiritual disinheritance, severing her from her heritage and any sense of belonging. This wound of abandonment, coupled with the constant, searing rejection, taught her a brutal lesson. Her very existence was a burden, a mistake that could never be rectified in the eyes of Eldoria, shaping her into a silent observer of a life she could never truly join. This pervasive sense of worthlessness seeped into every fiber of her being, manifesting as a quiet humility that bordered on self-effacement. She learned early to occupy as little space as possible, to speak only when spoken to, and to never ever draw attention to her anomalous presence. Her self-perception was a distorted mirror reflecting society's disdain. She saw herself as a burden, a perpetual outsider, deserving of nothing more than the scraps of existence she managed to carve out. The vibrant tapestry of elven culture, rich with ancient spells and intricate rituals, was a world she observed from the outside, a ghost at the feast. Every task she undertook, from foraging for meager sustenance to mending her worn garments, was performed with a meticulousness born not of pride, but of a desperate need to avoid further censure. Her quiet resilience was a shield, but beneath it, the belief in her own fundamental inadequacy remained a constant, gnawing pain. Her life on the fringes of the Shadowfen was a stark testament to this imposed reality, a relentless cycle of survival that left no room for frivolous dreams or personal aspirations. The damp hovel, her only sanctuary, demanded constant upkeep against the encroaching elements, and every meal was a hard-won victory against scarcity. She bore the silent weight of ensuring her own survival, a responsibility amplified by the fact that no one in Eldoria would lift a finger to aid the magicless half-elf. This crushing burden, self-imposed yet entirely a product of her society's neglect, extinguished any nascent desires for a life beyond mere existence. There was no time, no energy, no emotional space to contemplate a future filled with joy or connection. Her world was small, defined by immediate needs and constant vigilance, pushing any thoughts of a normal life, let alone a romantic one, far from her reach. The very notion of romance was a cruel fantasy, a luxury afforded only to those deemed worthy by Eldoria's stringent magical hierarchy. For Ilara, the idea of opening her scarred heart of inviting intimacy, was fraught with unimaginable terror. She had known only rejection, and the thought of offering her vulnerability to someone, only to be met with familiar disdain or, worse, pity, was a pain she could not bear to risk. Her lack of magic, her impurity, was not merely a social inconvenience. It was, in her mind, a fundamental flaw that rendered her unlovable, incapable of inspiring genuine affection. Who would choose a barren vessel when the world offered vibrant, magically gifted partners? Her deepest desire for connection was thus locked away, a secret shame, buried beneath layers of self-preservation, ensuring that no one could ever get close enough to inflict the ultimate wound of romantic rejection. Despite the hardened shell she presented to the world, Ilara's greatest fear was not of physical hardship or even death, but of the chilling, eternal prospect of perpetual solitude. The thought of living and dying utterly alone, unmourned, unremembered, was a silent scream within her soul. It was a terrifying contradiction to her self-imposed isolation, a desperate yearning for the very connection she believed herself unworthy of. This unspoken desire, a fragile ember in the ashes of her hope, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit within her, a silent rebellion against the fate society had decreed. She yearned for a single soul who might see beyond the superficial markers of magic and lineage, who could glimpse the quiet strength and empathy beneath her guarded exterior. This deeply hidden wish was her most dangerous vulnerability, a dream she dared not whisper, even to the wind. The raw, desperate energy she had felt earlier, emanating from the wounded unicorn she instinctively tended, now pulsed with an undeniable, insistent pull. Back in her hovel, the encounter with the magnificent creature and the silent, watchful King Theron remained a bewildering blur. Yet the quiet of her solitude was irrevocably broken, as dusk painted the sky in hues of bruised purple and deep crimson. A contingent of Eldoria's elite guard, their armor gleaming with enchanted light, appeared at the edge of the Shadowfen. Their presence, usually a harbinger of disdain, was different this time, a strange mix of urgency and reluctant respect. A stern, unyielding captain stepped forward, his gaze piercing, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Ilara," he announced, her name on his lips, an unsettling event. "The king summons you. You are to come to the royal palace immediately." The words hung, a decree that shattered her world and plunged her into an unknown destiny, a place she had only ever glimpsed from the shadows. King Theron, a monolith carved from granite and shadowed by the weight of centuries, watched from the concealed vantage point as the half-elf Ilara knelt by the fallen unicorn. His presence alone, a formidable aura of absolute power and ancient lineage, commanded the very air around him, yet he remained unseen, his gaze fixed, unwavering. The golden threads of his tunic, woven with forgotten elven runes, shimmered faintly in the fading light, a stark contrast to the despair that gnawed at his core. He was Eldoria's shield, its sword, its very heartbeat. But even his formidable magic had failed to soothe the dying beast, to witness her bare, magicless hands, those hands deemed impure by his rigid society, bring a flicker of life back to the ethereal creature, was a shock that resonated through his ancient bloodline, shattering every preconceived notion of power he had ever held. It was an affront, a miracle, and a desperate hope, all wrapped in a single, impossible moment. The blight that crept across Eldoria was a poison seeping into the very roots of his kingdom, a slow, insidious decay that withered ancient trees, dimmed the vibrancy of arcane rivers, and weakened the once unbreakable bond with the unicorns. Theron felt its icy tendrils in his own spirit, a constant gnawing fear that he was failing his ancestors, failing his people, failing the legacy etched into his very soul. The Elven Council, A cacophony of ancient voices clinging to tradition offered no solutions, only criticisms veiled in reverence. He was a king besieged, not by armies, but by an unseen enemy that threatened to extinguish the light of Eldoria forever, leaving behind only dust and forgotten magic. The pressure was a suffocating cloak, reminding him daily of his singular, terrifying responsibility to a realm teetering on the precipice of oblivion. Beneath the unyielding mask of kingship, a profound solitude reigned within Theron. He was the most powerful being in Eldoria, yet paradoxically the most isolated. His vulnerability was a closely guarded secret, a growing fear that he was not strong enough, not pure enough to stem the tide of decay. Whispers of a hidden flaw in his own bloodline, a weakness passed down through generations, echoed in the silent chambers of his mind, fueling a terror of an unknown future. He carried the weight of a dying realm, the burden of a destiny he feared he could not fulfill, and the chilling prospect of being the last king to witness Eldoria's fall. This silent, internal battle left him with no confidants, no equals, only the oppressive weight of his crown and the desperate yearning for a solution that seemed perpetually out of reach. The revelation at the Shadowfen was a seismic shift, a truth so profound it threatened to unravel the very fabric of his belief system. The ancient pact with the unicorns, guardians of Eldoria's magic, was weakening because pure magic, his magic, their magic, was somehow corrupting, or at least incompatible, with its fading essence. It was a paradox that defied all elven wisdom. Only the magicless half-elf, the outcast, the one deemed impure and worthless, could approach the creature without further harm. Her touch, devoid of arcane energy, was a balm, a stabilizing force that his own potent magic could not replicate. Ilara was not just a solution, she was the only solution, a living contradiction to everything Eldoria held sacred, and the desperate, undeniable key to reigniting the ancient magic and saving his dying realm. The decision to summon her was not made lightly, but with the cold, calculated desperation of a king on the brink. He understood the firestorm it would ignite within the rigid elven court, the outrage among pureblood nobles who would see her presence as an abomination, a pollution of their sacred lineage. His authority would be questioned, his judgment scorned. But Theron was beyond caring for petty politics when the very soul of Eldoria hung in the balance. He had observed Ilara's quiet resilience, her empathy, the unyielding strength in her eyes, even in the face of constant rejection. This was not a choice, it was an imperative, a gamble that risked not only his crown, but the very soul of his people. He knew she would be afraid, that her summons to the royal palace would feel like a prelude to punishment, a final, definitive rejection from the world that had always cast her aside. Theron could almost taste the fear she must be feeling, the quiet tremor of a heart that had known only solitude and scorn. Yet there was no other path. He had to tear her from her shadowed existence, from the only life she had ever known, and thrust her into the blinding, unforgiving light of the court. The weight of this imposition, the injustice of it, sat heavily on his conscience, a rare crack in his stoic facade. He was bringing her to Eldoria not for her sake, but for his kingdom's, and the irony of it was a bitter, necessary pill. The gleaming spires of Eldoria, once a distant, unattainable dream, now loomed terrifyingly close. Their ethereal beauty, a stark contrast to Ilara's trembling heart. The journey from the Shadowfen had been a blur of silent, armored figures and hushed urgency, each step taking her further from the only existence she had ever known, and deeper into the suffocating weight of an unknown fate. The palace gates, carved with intricate ancient runes, parted before them, revealing a world of opulent marble and shimmering magical light that assaulted her senses, making her feel even more coarse and out of place. Whispers, sharp and disdainful, slithered from the shadows of arched doorways as noble elves, their faces a mask of disdain, observed her passage. She walked with a quiet, desperate dignity, her head held high, though every fibre of her being screamed to flee, to return to the comforting anonymity of her forgotten hovel. This was not a welcome, but a summons, a grim prelude to a judgment she felt powerless to escape. She was led through labyrinthine corridors, each adorned with tapestries depicting glorious elven victories and ancient magical feats, a constant, mocking reminder of her own barrenness. Finally, a pair of imposing, magically sealed doors swung open, revealing a chamber of austere power. King Theron stood before a grand window, his back to her, silhouetted against the fading light, his figure an imposing monolith of authority and silent contemplation. The air crackled with a palpable tension, thick with the scent of ancient magic and something else, a subtle, metallic tang of desperation that even Ilara's magicless senses could perceive. He turned slowly, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. In that moment, the vast chasm of their worlds, their status, and their very beings stretched impossibly wide, yet a strange, dangerous current seemed to pull them irrevocably closer. His voice, when it finally broke the suffocating silence, was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that carried the weight of centuries and the command of a king. "Ilara," he began, the name a foreign, unsettling utterance from his lips. "You possess a unique gift, one that defies all our understanding, yet holds the key to Eldoria's survival." He gestured to a large, intricately carved table laden with ancient scrolls and maps depicting a kingdom slowly consumed by shadow. His powerful presence filled the room, dominating every inch of space. Yet his gaze held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. A vulnerability, perhaps, or a profound weariness. She stood, rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs, a mixture of fear, resentment, and a strange, unwilling fascination warring within her. This man, this king, was a force of nature, and she, a mere leaf in his path. Theron moved from the window, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers, and began to speak of the blight that consumed Eldoria. He revealed the chilling truth of its insidious spread, not just a physical decay, but a spiritual one, weakening the very core of their ancient magic. He spoke of the Elven Council, their rigid adherence to tradition, their inability to comprehend a solution outside the bounds of pure elven magic. His voice, usually unwavering, held a subtle tremor as he confessed his own desperate struggle, the whispers of a perceived flaw in his ancient bloodline, a weakness that haunted his every waking moment and threatened to unravel his reign. The burden of his ancestry, the weight of a dying realm, pressed down on him, revealing a king besieged by an enemy he could neither fight nor fully understand, a silent confession of a loneliness that mirrored her own. "Our ancient pact with the unicorns, the heart of our magic, is failing," Theron continued, his gaze piercing, reflecting the gravity of his words. "My magic, the purest of Eldoria, only worsened the creature's plight. Yet your touch, devoid of arcane energy, brought it solace, a flicker of hope." He paused, allowing the monumental implications to sink in, the absurdity of it all. "You are the antithesis of everything we hold sacred, Ilara, yet you are also the only one who can bridge this chasm." Then, with a stark finality that brooked no argument, he laid bare his desperate gamble. "I propose a union, a marriage of convenience, enforced by ancient magic, to stabilize the Unicorn Pact and restore Eldoria's fading essence. You will be my consort." The words hung in the air, a shocking, impossible decree that shattered her world into a million fragments. Ilara's breath hitched, the audacity of his proposal stealing the air from her lungs. A consort? Her, the outcast, the magicless half-elf, bound to the king of Eldoria. It was an insult veiled as an offer, a cruel twist of fate that ripped away the last vestiges of her solitary freedom. She imagined the outrage, the fury of the court, the venomous whispers that would follow her every step. It was trading one prison for another, a gilded cage under the relentless scrutiny of a kingdom that despised her very existence. The thought of being tethered to this powerful, dominant man, his presence a constant reminder of her perceived inadequacies, was a terrifying prospect. Her internal struggle was a maelstrom of fear, defiance, and a nascent, unsettling flicker of something akin to morbid curiosity. Theron, observing her stunned silence, pressed on, his voice softening, betraying a calculated understanding of her plight. "This union will offer you protection, Ilara, a status you have never known, a shield against the prejudice that has haunted your life." He walked towards her, stopping mere feet away, his towering presence casting a long shadow. "You will have a home, security, and a voice within these walls. No longer an outcast, but a queen, albeit by decree." He offered her the one thing she secretly yearned for, acceptance, belonging, albeit on his terms. The words were a potent lure, a promise of an end to her crushing solitude, a chance to escape the endless cycle of hardship and scorn. Like this video if you're already hooked, and subscribe for more epic romances. Her gaze met his, a silent battle of wills in the charged air. The offer, while horrifying, was also her only path to survival, to a semblance of dignity. She could refuse and return to her shadowed existence only to watch Eldoria crumble, or embrace this dangerous, impossible bargain. A slow, resolute fire ignited within her, a defiance she hadn't known she possessed. "I accept, Your Majesty," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady, "but on one condition." Theron's brow furrowed, a flicker of surprise in his steel-grey eyes. "I will be your consort," Ilara continued, her chin rising, "but you must acknowledge my mother's lineage, the human blood within me, as a strength, not a stain. I will not erase who I am for your kingdom." Ilara's audacious condition, a quiet rebellion against centuries of elven custom, hung in the air, momentarily silencing even the formidable King Theron. His steel-grey eyes, usually unreadable, flickered with a strange mixture of surprise and grudging respect, before settling into a renewed, resolute intensity. The urgency of Eldoria's plight, the dying unicorn, pressed heavily on his shoulders, making any further negotiation impossible. A swift, unceremonious ceremony was decreed for the very next dawn, a stark reflection of the dire circumstances. Ilara felt a cold dread coil in her stomach, but beneath it, a tiny, defiant spark ignited. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about asserting her humanity, her truth. In a world that had tried to erase it, she was stepping into the gilded cage, yes, but not entirely on their terms, a small victory in a battle she was still far from understanding. The royal chapel, usually reserved for grand, centuries-old rituals, felt eerily quiet, stripped of its usual splendor for this hastily arranged union. Instead of vibrant tapestries and a full choir, only a few essential figures stood witness. The stoic king, Ilara, the ancient high priestess, whose eyes held a weary knowing, and a handful of the most influential, albeit disgruntled, council members. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable mixture of resentment and morbid curiosity emanating from the gathered nobility. Ilara, clad in a simple dark gown that barely hinted at royal attire, felt the weight of their collective gaze pressing down on her, each stare a silent judgment, a reaffirmation of her status as an unwelcome intruder. The chill of the ancient stones seeped into her bones, a stark reminder of the monumental, terrifying step she was about to take. Among the sparse gathering, Lady Arian, a pure-blood elven noble with eyes like chips of ice and a lineage as ancient as the stars, watched Ilara with undisguised contempt. Arian, a favored suitor to the king and a vocal advocate for elven purity, clutched her silken robes, her knuckles white. Whispers like venomous serpents slithered through the hushed chapel. An abomination, one noble murmured, barely concealing his disgust. A stain upon our sacred line, another hissed, his gaze fixed on Ilara's dark skin, a stark contrast to the pale, ethereal beauty of Eldoria's elite. The collective disdain was a physical force, a tidal wave of hatred threatening to drown Ilara. Yet she met their gazes with a quiet, unyielding resolve, refusing to break, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Ilara stood before the altar, the ancient magic of Eldoria thrumming faintly beneath the marble, a power she could never wield, yet was now inexplicably bound to. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and defiance. Each whisper, each scornful glance was a familiar wound, but today something had shifted. A fragile, nascent strength, born from her desperate condition to the king, kept her spine straight, her chin subtly lifted. She was no longer just the outcast. She was a pawn in a desperate game. Yes, but a pawn who had dared to speak her truth to a king. The weight of the moment, the terrifying finality of it all, threatened to overwhelm her, yet she clung to the small ember of rebellion, a silent promise to herself that she would not be entirely consumed. Theron watched Ilara from across the small, sacred space, his expression a carefully constructed mask of regal stoicism. He felt the simmering resentment of his court like a physical presence, a challenge to his authority that he acknowledged silently but refused to entertain. His gaze, however, was drawn irresistibly to Ilara, to the quiet dignity with which she bore the onslaught of disdain. He saw the subtle tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible clench of her jaw, and a flicker of something unexpected stirred within him. Not pity, but a grudging admiration for her resilience. This was not a bride he desired, but a necessary sacrifice, a means to an end. Yet, her unyielding spirit, her quiet strength, was beginning to chip away at the granite walls he had built around his own heart. The high priestess, her voice ancient and resonant, began the binding ritual. It was not a joyous celebration, but a solemn invocation of Eldoria's oldest magic, calling upon the very essence of the land to witness and enforce this controversial union. Theron extended his hand, his touch surprisingly firm and steady as he placed an ancient, unadorned silver band on Ilara's finger. It wasn't a symbol of love, but of unbreakable pact, a magical tether forged in desperation. Ilara felt a faint, cold thrum of energy as the ring settled, a sensation that wasn't painful, but undeniably binding, seeping into her very core. There was no turning back, no escape from this path now. Her fate, intertwined with Eldoria's, was sealed with a whisper of forgotten spells and the glint of cold silver. As the final incantations faded, the High Priestess turned to Theron, her eyes holding a silent command. "The pact requires a seal, Your Majesty," she intoned, her gaze flicking between the king and the half-elf. Theron, his expression unreadable, turned fully to Ilara. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheekbone. It was a gesture of unexpected tenderness, a spark of contact that sent a jolt, sharp and undeniable, through Ilara. Her breath hitched, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of the court's stares, the burden of her past, even the blight on Eldoria, faded. All that existed was the warmth of his skin against hers, the unexpected intimacy of his gaze, and the terrifying realization that this agreement was already veering wildly beyond the realm of mere convenience. His eyes, those winter sky depths, searched hers, and in their depths Elara saw not just duty, but a flicker of something raw, something she couldn't name. Then Theron leaned in, his lips, firm and unyielding, met hers. It was meant to be a ceremonial kiss, a symbolic sealing of the pact. But the moment their mouths touched, a wave of profound, unexpected warmth washed over Elara. It was not gentle, nor was it forceful, but a deep, resonant connection that felt ancient and utterly primal. A strange, almost magical energy seemed to pass between them, a silent language spoken not through spells, but through flesh and spirit. Her mind reeled, every preconceived notion of their forced union shattering into a million shimmering fragments. This was not just a king and his consort. This was something far, far more dangerous. A collective gasp rippled through the small assembly, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the hushed reverence of the chapel. Lady Arian's eyes, already narrowed with malice, widened in disbelief, her carefully constructed composure threatening to crack. Even the high priestess, usually stoic, subtly shifted, her gaze fixed on the king and his new consort with an unsettling blend of shock and dawning comprehension. The kiss, meant to be a cold, political formality, had ignited an undeniable spark, a visible tremor in the air that spoke of a connection far deeper than mere convenience. It was a moment that transcended the political, hinting at a dangerous, forbidden chemistry that would irrevocably alter the course of Eldoria's destiny and the lives of its new rulers. As Theron slowly pulled away, the lingering warmth of his lips on hers felt like a brand, a permanent mark on her soul. Elara's mind raced, a maelstrom of confusion and a terrifying, exhilarating awareness. The world, which had always been a place of cold, hard facts for her, suddenly pulsed with an unknown, dangerous possibility. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was a terrifying, beautiful precipice. The silent promise in that unexpected touch, in that profound ceremonial kiss, echoed in her very being. This fragile, forced alliance would not merely mend Eldoria's magic, but would irrevocably shatter the carefully constructed walls around their hearts, binding them in a way neither could have ever foreseen. The lingering warmth of Theron's kiss, a forbidden ember against her lips, haunted Elara as she navigated the hushed, opulent corridors of the palace. Each gilded archway, every shimmering tapestry, seemed to mock her peasant origins, amplifying the whispers that followed her like spectral hunters. She was a queen by decree, a consort in name, yet the disdain in the eyes of the passing nobles was a palpable chill, a constant reminder of her unwelcome presence. They saw not a solution, but an abomination, a living affront to their sacred lineage. Her forced elevation felt less like liberation and more like an elaborate, suffocating trap, exchanging the physical hardship of the Shadowfen for a spiritual torment within these gleaming walls. The quiet solitude she once knew, though lonely, had offered a strange kind of freedom. Now, every breath was scrutinized, every movement judged, and the weight of their collective scorn threatened to crush her fragile sense of self. Theron, from the stoic confines of his study, observed Elara's hesitant movements through the palace courtyards. He noted the way she held herself, a blend of defiance and quiet trepidation, and the almost imperceptible flinch when a noble's gaze lingered too long. A strange, unfamiliar protectiveness stirred within him, a counterpoint to the political calculations that had necessitated their union. He found himself offering subtle guidance during court gatherings, a quiet word on etiquette, a brief explanation of a complex ritual, actions that went beyond mere regal duty. These small gestures, almost imperceptible to others, were a balm to Ilara's raw nerves, a silent acknowledgement that he saw her, truly saw her, beyond the political pawn she was meant to be. The lines of convenience blurred further with each shared glance, each unspoken understanding, deepening the dangerous connection between them. During a formal evening banquet, the tension in the grand hall was as thick as the rich brocade drapes. Lady Arian, her voice dripping with syrupy malice, seized an opportunity. "My queen," she purred, her eyes glinting with scorn, "we marvel at your unique talents. Tell us, does your lack of arcane energy give you a special affinity for the mundane? Perhaps you could advise the kitchen staff on foraging for mushrooms, a skill no doubt honed in the Shadowfen." A ripple of cruel laughter spread through the assembled nobles, their gazes sharp and predatory, eager to witness Ilara's humiliation. The words were a calculated strike, designed to expose her low birth, her lack of magic, and her perceived unworthiness, reducing her to nothing more than a common peasant, an object of ridicule in their hallowed halls. Ilara felt the familiar sting of rejection, a cold dread coiling in her stomach, threatening to paralyze her. Before Ilara could even formulate a response, a sudden, resonant silence fell upon the hall as Theron rose from his throne. His voice, usually a measured rumble, now cut through the air with the sharp edge of tempered steel. "Lady Arian," he stated, his eyes, like chips of ice, fixing upon her, "my consort's talents, as you so delicately put it, are what keep Eldoria from crumbling into dust. Her connection to the unicorns, unique and unburdened by our own failing magic, is a gift, not a deficiency. Perhaps you would prefer to offer your own arcane prowess to the dying beast, or are you too preoccupied with petty gossip to truly serve your kingdom?" His words were a public rebuke, a devastating blow delivered with regal precision, silencing the laughter and sending a clear message. Ilara was under his protection, and her honor was his to defend. A stunned silence followed Theron's declaration, the nobles' faces a mixture of shock and suppressed fury. Ilara, still reeling from Arian's venom, felt a dizzying wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. Gratitude, sharp and unexpected, mingled with a profound confusion. This was not the cold, calculating king she had expected. This was a man who had chosen to defend her, publicly, unequivocally, against the very elite who upheld his power. The weight of his protection was both startling and intoxicating, a stark contrast to the lifetime of abandonment she had endured. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls around her heart, hardened by years of scorn, trembled, threatening to give way to a dangerous, nascent hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this fragile alliance was becoming something more, something real. Later that evening, a quiet, almost domestic scene unfolded in Theron's private study. Far removed from the court's judgmental eyes, he sat poring over ancient texts, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows, while Ilara, surprisingly, found herself sketching the intricate patterns of the palace architecture in a borrowed journal. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but held a comfortable, shared understanding. He looked up, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Your sketches are quite detailed, Ilara. You have an eye for structure." It was a simple observation, devoid of political pretense, a moment of shared humanity. A tension, different from the court's hostility, pulsed between them, a nascent attraction, a dangerous curiosity that defied their forced circumstances, weaving a delicate thread of connection in the quiet intimacy of the room. As the days bled into weeks, a nagging question began to plague Ilara's thoughts, a quiet whisper in the chambers of her heart. Are we truly just pretending? The public defense, the stolen glances, the small, unexpected kindnesses from Theron. Each instance chipped away at her resolve to maintain emotional distance. She had entered this union with a hardened shell, expecting only disdain and utility, yet Theron's actions, however calculated they might be, resonated with a sincerity that was increasingly difficult to dismiss. Her vulnerability, long buried beneath layers of self-preservation, began to stir, a terrifying and exhilarating sensation. Was she foolish to hope for genuine connection? Or was this entire charade designed to slowly, inexorably break down the walls around her deeply scarred heart, leaving her exposed to a pain far greater than any she had known? Theron, too, found himself wrestling with a disquieting internal shift. The marriage of convenience he had orchestrated was proving to be anything but convenient for his carefully guarded emotions. Ilara's quiet strength, her unyielding spirit in the face of relentless prejudice, ignited a respect he had rarely felt for anyone, let alone an outcast. He caught himself observing her, not as a tool for Eldoria's survival, but as a woman, vibrant and resilient, her dark eyes holding a depth that captivated him. The thought of their union as a mere political maneuver felt increasingly hollow, a lie he told himself to maintain control. He, the king of Eldoria, powerful and dominant, was finding his carefully constructed emotional fortress subtly undermined by a magicless half-elf, a dangerous vulnerability that threatened to expose the very flaw he feared in his own lineage. A typical morning found Ilara observing Theron from a discreet distance as he presided over a meeting with his advisors, his brow furrowed with the weight of Eldoria's pressing concerns. She saw the immense burden he carried, the relentless pressure of a dying kingdom resting squarely on his shoulders, and a nascent understanding, almost a shared empathy, bloomed within her. He wasn't just a king. He was a man struggling, isolated by his power, just as she had been isolated by her lack of it. Their shared responsibility for Eldoria's fate, once a mere decree, now felt like a tangible bond, a silent pact forged in desperation. This quiet observation, seeing him not as an imposing figure, but as a fellow burdened soul, deepened the unspoken connection between them, pulling them further into a dangerous, uncharted emotional territory. The Elven Council, however, refused to be swayed by mere displays of royal authority. Whispers of a tainted bloodline and unnatural alliances grew louder, fueled by Lady Arian and her purist faction. During a tense session, a venerable council elder, his voice echoing with centuries of tradition, challenged Theron directly. "Your Majesty, while we respect your desperate measures, this union has yet to yield the promised results. The unicorn still languishes. Perhaps the true path lies in severing this unconventional bond and seeking a solution within the purity of our own magic." The veiled threat was unmistakable. They doubted Ilara's efficacy, questioned Theron's judgment, and were actively plotting to undo his controversial marriage, pushing Eldoria to the brink of open rebellion. One evening, after a particularly draining day of council meetings and public appearances designed to showcase their united front, Ilara found herself alone in the royal gardens, seeking solace amidst the ancient, wilting flora. Theron, unexpectedly, joined her. He didn't speak, simply stood beside her, his presence a quiet comfort in the deepening twilight. Then, without a word, he reached out, his thumb gently tracing the worry lines etched between her brows. It was a fleeting, tender gesture, utterly devoid of political motive, a raw moment of unspoken understanding that pierced through her defenses. In that brief touch, Ilara felt a profound sense of being seen, truly cared for, not as a consort or a catalyst, but as herself, solidifying the terrifying realization that their connection was no longer just a pretense. The fragile peace, however, was about to shatter. The very next morning, a formal decree, bearing the seal of the Grand Council and supported by the most ancient houses, arrived at the palace. It demanded a ceremony of ancestral purity, be held within the month, a ritual traditionally performed by the Queen to bless the land and, crucially, to affirm the royal lineage's ability to produce an heir capable of wielding Eldoria's full magic. The implication was clear. If Ilara, the magicless consort, could not perform the ritual, or worse, if she was deemed incapable of bearing a magically gifted heir, the council threatened to invoke an ancient law, effectively nullifying their marriage and placing the kingdom in the hands of a purist regency. The fate of their union, and Eldoria itself, now hung precariously on a test designed for her to fail. The Grand Council's decree, demanding the ceremony of ancestral purity, landed like a death knell in the fragile sanctuary of their unspoken understanding. Ilara felt the fragile thread connecting her to Theron snap, replaced by an icy chasm of betrayal and fear. The air in their shared chambers, once thick with an almost tangible, dangerous chemistry, now vibrated with a suffocating silence. She saw his distant gaze, the grim set of his jaw, and knew he had allowed this, had let them forge a weapon designed for her humiliation. The warmth of his touch, the unexpected tenderness of his kiss, now felt like cruel illusions, masterful deceptions to secure her cooperation. Her heart, which had dared to unfurl a fragile petal of hope, recoiled, pulling back into the hardened shell she had worn for a lifetime. The weight of this new, profound emotional distance was far more agonizing than any physical hardship she had known in the Shadowfen. Theron felt Ilara's retreat as a physical blow, a cold emptiness where a nascent warmth had begun to bloom. The Council's decree was a calculated maneuver, a brutal chess move he had anticipated but struggled to counter without exposing a truth far more dangerous than Ilara's perceived impurity. He saw the wounded pride in her eyes, the suspicion that mirrored his own carefully guarded secrets, and the emotional distance between them widened with every unspoken accusation. The weight of his crown felt heavier than ever, pressing down on a conscience already burdened by the desperate measures he had taken for Eldoria. He yearned to explain, to bridge the chasm with words of reassurance, but the ancient prophecies and the Council's insidious machinations held him captive, forcing him to maintain a stoic facade that only deepened Ilara's pain and his own gnawing solitude. One night, the stifling silence between them became unbearable. Theron found Ilara in the moonlit gardens, her shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on a dying rose. He approached cautiously, the chill in the air mirroring the frost in their hearts. "Ilara," he began, his voice a low, strained whisper, "there is a truth you must know, one I have kept hidden to protect you, and Eldoria." He spoke of an ancient prophecy, a dark premonition whispered through his bloodline for generations, foretelling a time when Eldoria's magic would wane, and only a union with an unburdened soul could restore it. The Council, aware of this prophecy, had manipulated the ceremony of ancestral purity not merely as a test of lineage, but as a desperate, final attempt to force the prophecy's fulfillment or condemn them both. The deadline was unforgivingly close, a mere 2 weeks. Ilara listened, her breath catching in her throat. As Theron unveiled the chilling weight of his secret, the prophecy, the manipulated ritual, the desperate gambit, it was a profound betrayal, yet also a terrifying glimpse into the crushing burden he carried. Her initial anger warred with a dizzying wave of empathy. "So I am merely a tool, then," she whispered, her voice laced with unshed tears. "A means to an end, to fulfill a prophecy, even if it destroys me." His eyes, filled with an anguish that mirrored her own, met hers. "Never a tool, Ilara," he declared, stepping closer, his hand hovering, almost touching her arm. "You are the only hope, and the thought of losing you, not just for Eldoria, but for myself, is a torment I had not foreseen." The words, almost a confession of love, hung in the cold night air, leaving her breathless, torn between fury and a dangerous, undeniable yearning. Theron's raw admission, the desperate plea in his eyes, shattered Ilara's resolve to remain hardened. The moral dilemma pressed down on them both. Could they continue this dangerous pretense, knowing the council's true intentions, risking her public humiliation and potential downfall if the ceremony failed? Or could they expose the truth, risking Eldoria's fragile stability and igniting a civil war among the purest factions? "I need you, Ilara," he confessed, his voice thick with a vulnerability she had never imagined possible from the king, not just for the prophecy, but for the quiet strength you bring, for the way you defy their scorn. You are becoming the truest part of my reign, the only light in this deepening shadow. His words were a desperate, almost reckless declaration, binding them in a shared anguish and an impossible hope, pushing them to the brink of a choice that would define their intertwined destinies. The next morning, the palace buzzed with an ominous energy. Messengers had been dispatched, heralds had proclaimed, and the grand hall was being prepared for an urgent public assembly, far grander than any private council meeting. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable tension that promised a seismic shift in Eldoria's precarious political landscape. Theron, his face a mask of resolute control, stood by Ilara, his hand subtly resting at the small of her back. A gesture of quiet, defiant solidarity. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, as the massive doors to the grand hall swung open, revealing a sea of expectant, eager faces. The high priestess, her ancient eyes fixed on the royal couple, stepped forward, her voice about to announce something. The fate of their union, the future of Eldoria, and the secret of the prophecy were about to be laid bare, irrevocably altering everything. The high priestess, her ancient voice echoing through the hushed grand hall, raised a gnarled hand, silencing the restless murmurs. "By the sacred laws of Eldoria," she intoned, her gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles, "the Grand Council, in its wisdom, has decreed the immediate commencement of the ceremony of ancestral purity. This ancient ritual, designed to affirm the Queen's lineage and bless the land, shall commence now." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A wave of anticipation and veiled triumph from Lady Arian's faction. Ilara felt a cold dread seize her, the weight of the council's trap pressing down. She braced herself for the inevitable humiliation, the public exposure of her magicless state, a final, definitive rejection from a world that already scorned her. Yet, as Theron's hand subtly tightened on her lower back, a quiet strength, born from their shared secret and burgeoning connection, steadied her resolve. This was not merely a ritual, it was a battleground, and she would not yield. Theron stepped forward, his powerful voice cutting through the tension, a king claiming his authority. "Indeed," he affirmed, his eyes, like chips of glacial ice, sweeping over the council. "The ceremony of ancestral purity shall commence, but not as a test of my consort's perceived flaws, but as a testament to Eldoria's true salvation." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, then revealed the ancient prophecy, the unburdened soul, that would restore Eldoria's fading magic, a truth he had guarded for centuries. "The blight," he declared, his voice resonating with absolute conviction, "is not a test of purity, but a rejection of it. Our magic, in its pristine form, has become a poison to the unicorns, a barrier to Eldoria's healing. Ilara's touch, her unique essence, is not a flaw, but the very key to our survival. The purity of a spirit unburdened by our ancestral magic." A storm of outrage erupted from the purist faction, but Theron silenced them with a single, commanding gesture. He turned to Ilara, his gaze softening, revealing a depth of emotion that transcended his regal facade. "Ilara," he stated, his voice ringing with a vulnerability that pierced the heart of the grand hall, "you were summoned as a consort of convenience, yet you have become the very heart of this kingdom. My reign, my soul, our future, they are irrevocably bound to yours. I stand before all of Eldoria and before my ancestors to declare that I love you, not for your magic, but for the unwavering strength of your spirit, for the light you bring to my shadowed world. His confession was a defiant roar against centuries of tradition, a public declaration that shattered every expectation. Ilara's breath hitched, her heart soaring even as tears pricked her eyes. His words, a balm to her lifetime of rejection, resonated deep within her, igniting a fierce, undeniable love she had dared not dream of. She stepped towards him, her hand reaching out, and in a gesture that defied all courtly etiquette, she intertwined her fingers with his. "And I, your majesty," she responded, her voice trembling but clear, "love you for seeing me, truly seeing me, beyond the shadows of my past. I choose this union, not just for Eldoria, but for us, for a future where our differences are our greatest strength." Their gazes locked, a silent, profound understanding passing between them, a declaration of a love forged in adversity, destined to defy all odds. Then, before the stunned court, Theron leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was neither ceremonial nor forced, but a raw, passionate testament to their unbreakable bond. It was a kiss that sealed not just a kingdom's fate, but two intertwined souls, a public defiance of every prejudice and expectation. The ancient magic of Eldoria, stirred by their unyielding love, and Ilara's unburdened spirit, pulsed through the hall, vibrant and pure, a silent testament to the prophecy fulfilled. This story ends, but there are many more waiting for you in our community, tales of courage and forbidden love. Next week, a lost prince will face something even more dangerous than a kingdom's curse. The blight receded, the unicorns thrived, and Eldoria blossomed anew, reborn from the ashes of ancient prejudice. Theron and Ilara, king and queen, stood as beacons of a new era, their love a legend whispered through the revitalized lands, a testament that true power lies not in magic alone, but in the courage to embrace the unexpected. A year later, the palace echoed with the joyful cries of their magically gifted heir, a child who bore both human darkness and elven grace, a living symbol of a kingdom healed and a love truly forged. De like si esta historia te atrapó. Suscríbete para la próxima. Comenta qué momento te impactó más. Their love, a whispered dawn in an ancient land, forever etched in the stars.